Hi, I'm Tom Pucci. Since 1974, the Woods Hole Theater Company's mission is to inspire audiences through the magic of the arts. To that end, our performance tonight is brought to you by the dark magic of technology and the creative magic of our storytellers. Welcome to the Woods Hole Theater Company's storytelling series, Tales and Anecdotes. Tonight's installment is titled Barracuda and Pony Tales. Here's Mike with a magically twisted tale of Barracuda.
Thanks, Tom. Let me invite you to close your eyes and imagine a faraway Caribbean island, one where the skies are always blue. The temperature is just perfect, where a gentle breeze nourishes the spirit and the water is magically enticing. Such a place actually exists on the island of Bonaire. And it was on this beautiful island that I spent a week. I came to Bonaire to snorkel in the world-famous coral reefs, and I was in no way disappointed. They were absolutely spectacular. And there was one reef in particular which stood out. Now, this reef was not easy to access. It was about a mile offshore, but the swim was well worth the effort. For here was a pristine coral reef covering more than 2 square miles. It was like an underwater Garden of Eden, with acres of coral of every color and shape imaginable. Thousands of exotic fish darted in and out of the nooks and crannies, and there was not another soul around. I'd spent about an hour exploring this amazing reef before an object, far off in the distance, caught my attention. My first impression was it was a large log floating on the surface. But then it suddenly rotated in my direction and swam towards me at attack speed. It looked like a torpedo with teeth. Though I had seen many barracudas before, this was my first encounter with the great barracuda. It's a distinct breed and the largest of the barracuda. They are known for their unpredictable aggression. I'd read of barracudas taking fingers, hands, arms, legs, and occasionally lives. And now one was swimming directly at me. Oh my God, I'm a goner, I thought. And then, miraculously, for no apparent reason, thank God, the fish stopped dead in its tracks, not more than 6 feet from me. My heart was beating so fast I could barely breathe. The fish was a beast at least as long as me, and I was completely alone, completely defenseless, and a mile from shore. One bite anywhere on my body, and I'd be dead. What was he waiting for? Well, I wasn't about to wait to find out. I slowly pivoted towards the shore, careful not to move too abruptly, lest I alarm the fish. I kicked very gently and kept my arms tucked tightly against my chest. And as I began my slow meander towards the shore, the damn fish did another, most unexpected thing. He swam precisely at my side, literally eyeball to eyeball, not more than 4 feet apart. When I speeded up a bit, so did the barracuda. If I slowed down, so did the fish. Veered right, veered left, he followed. No matter what, constant eyeball to eyeball contact. It was absolutely maddening. I was certain at any moment he was going to turn his head and bite my face. After about a quarter of a mile of travel, I began to notice that the barracuda, though still eyeball to eyeball, was slowly inching closer to me. He was now so close that I could not place my arms at my side without touching the damn fish. Now let me tell you, a lot goes through a person's mind when in such a situation. First, there's nonstop prayer. And then there are the obvious questions. What was the fish thinking? Was this a territorial thing? Was he just waiting for that perfect moment to bite me? Or was this some type of bizarre social interaction? I had no idea. By the time we were 300 yards from shore, we had been swimming together for 45 minutes, literally, cheek to cheek, eyeball to eyeball. I had been acquainted with every feature of this fish's face, and especially his teeth. They were long, extremely pointy, and abundant. And just to make sure that I took special notice of that fact, the fish did something which shook me to the core, and it still gives me the willies. God only knows why, but he opened its mouth to its full extent, as if giving a gigantic yawn. And just to make sure I was paying attention, he did it again. It was like he was doing a calculation of his bite radius to my head circumference. And it freaked me out and it scared the bejeebers out of me. So I countered with something completely ridiculous. I bent down and took off my fins, put them around my hands, and clapped them together as hard as I could, again and again and again. So, what was the point of this maneuver? No idea. It was completely instinctual. This fish had made an aggressive threat. I was completely defenseless. I felt like I had to do something. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. I fully expected the fish to laugh in my face and then finish me off. But he barely reacted. He just stared back at me as he had all along, looking perhaps a bit puzzled. And then he suddenly rotated his body, and thank God, he swam back out to the reef. Now, I have thought about that encounter many times since then. I've asked marine biologists knowledgeable about fish and barracudas in particular if they had ever seen, read, or heard of such behavior. None had. So, what the hell was going on with this barracuda? Here's my theory. In a nutshell, I believe that the fish was lonely. Now, before you reject this out of hand, let's review the events just as they happened. First, the fish spotted me way out in the distance, and then he swam towards me like a long-lost brother. Next, he swam right alongside me at exactly my pace. And then, as he got to know me, he swam even closer for 45 minutes. After a while, he realized, hey, this guy is pretty boring. So he yawned, twice in fact. And then, when I reacted aggressively towards him, he didn't retaliate, swam away. So, I maintain that the great barracuda is more like a pussycat than a lion. And for all of you doubting Thomases out there, I invite you to visit Bonaire. Great snorkeling and at least one friendly barracuda who's looking for a pal.
A bewitched barracuda, no doubt.
For sure, for sure.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, Tom, thank you.
Now, with her own story of the damn ponytail, abracadabra, it's Melinda.
I grew up in Ohio on a dairy farm. You know, Ohio that has the nut as the state flower, the old Rust Belt, a good place to be from. Anyway, this is a true story that happened to me in my teens, just a couple of years ago. Anyway, I am the youngest of five children. My brother, who was next to me in age, was 8 years older, and my oldest sister was 20 years older. I was raised like an only child with many, many benefits. My mother used to say she didn't attend her Planned Parenthood meetings. Evidently not. And so I reaped the benefits of being the baby of the family. Oh, I did. My parents were old and tired and couldn't be bothered because they had done this, count it, 4 times before. However, I was also somewhat, I'm just saying a little bit now, mischievous. My dad, who was a farmer and was well known for his colorful language, would say on occasion, "God damn, Melinda Sue, what have you been done now, or what have you been up to?" Well, in fact, he said it so often that I thought up until the age of 13, my first name was Goddamn Melinda. Oh, well, I started dating my current husband in high school. Yes, he was a senior and I was a sophomore. Typical teenage romance, you go for long drives. Gas was 35 cents a gallon. And we would go in his adorable Volkswagen convertible, dubbed Larry. Oh, I loved Larry. This car was the best, except when it rained, because the windshield wipers would or would not work. Also, the heater in the winter was questionable at best. Just let me tell you, though, it was the coolest of cars in the summer with the top down, driving around and around the A&W root beer stand. Oh, it was fun. Well, early one summer evening, just after dinner, and it doesn't get dark into Ohio very late because we have late sunsets and very quick sunrises. So because it sets over land, it's very slow. And it was almost 9:30 at night. So Joe picked me up after dinner to go for a drive with the top down. Oh, I was ready. Now, in the old days, you would go for a drive and probably park for a little while and kiss. You remember that out there, right? You would neck, make out. One of those favorite spots for us was the Delaware Dam area north of town. It was the dam of the Olentangy River that had been blocked because of the river flooding. It had become a beautiful recreation area for boats and camping. It had a large concrete dam for water release and control of the meandering Olentangy that flowed through the town. Well, we drove into the entrance, past the sign, winding our way with the lake on our right, down the gravel road through the trees to our favorite spot. As we drove in there, other cars were there, and some of our friends were there, and they were having a bonfire. And I said to Joe, "Hey, Joe, look, there's Mary Lou and Jonathan." So he turned to look, and boom! All of a sudden, we stopped dead. I was thrown forward and my head hit the windshield. Joe, of course, had the steering wheel to stop him from hitting his head. I could see out of my peripheral vision, the spider web starting on the windshield. And I could see that there was something sticking through the windshield, but I wasn't quite sure what it was. So I tried to pull my head back and I could not move my hair. My hair, the top of my head and the top of my ponytail had gone clear through the windshield and was outside of the car. Joe, realizing my head was stuck, he took out his trusty pocket knife and he began to saw off my ponytail inside the car. All I could think of was my head really hurts. There wasn't any blood. And just please get me home. Joe, get me home. So he saw it and he saw it and he saw it. And finally it came loose. And there it hung, part way outside the car and the top of it in the inside of the car. So we drove all the way out of the entranceway, driving down through the middle of town with a ponytail stuck in the windshield. Now, my home was on a hill with a circular driveway. And when we drove all the way down, you would have to drive all the way up and around to the back door. My mother was in the kitchen, and she could see out through the kitchen window, which was very large. And I could see her looking and wondering what was sticking out of the windshield that was broken. She gasped and she threw up her apron and she threw down her dish rag and she ran out the back door and she came totally gasping. At the same time, my dad came through the back door and said, "God damn, Melinda Sue, what have you done now?" Well, you know the story. And that's the ponytail incident. Thank you.
So basically, you are a child of the damned. Well, thank you, Melinda. On with our magical brew, a story of special ed, with a twist, of course. Cast your spell, Lorna.
Thanks, Tom. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us tonight. Now, the question for my story is, how does an object, a thing, become an heirloom? Now, I looked it up in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and the definition is this: it's an object, and it has monetary or sentimental value, and it's passed from one generation to the next. Now, obviously, there are typical things: jewelry, furniture, military medals, documents, all of those kinds of things that memorialize a certain moment, and many of us have those. But my story tonight is about the birth of an heirloom, and most of us are never present for those moments. This one is hard to miss. The story begins in the mid 1980s when my husband and I hosted a young Japanese woman named Mari. And she loved ducks. And when she came, that was one of the things that she absolutely needed to do. And here I have a picture of her feeding the ducks. There she is at 19 years old. And in Japan, they often kept ducks as pets. Our two young children adored her, and over the years, we were so fortunate to have her come and spend time with us. We really and truly became her American family. Now, fast forward 25 years to 2009. My husband had just passed away after a lengthy battle with cancer. Mari absolutely wanted to be here, and she flew in from Japan to be with us. I wanted her to feel part of sort of the American grieving and burial customs. So my friend Julie and I took her to the florist. I'd completed my selections, and when I was sitting at a small table that really was kind of out of sight around the corner from the main counter, I was exhausted, clearly grief stricken. All of a sudden, I see Julie walk around this corner. And she says, "I think you better come to the front and see what Mari's purchasing." I could tell by her tone that this might not be such a good thing. But really, think about it. At a small florist shop, what can you buy that's inappropriate? So I said to Julie, "What did she get?" Julie said, "A duck." Now, again, think about it. What kind of a duck do you get at a florist shop? A tiny little ceramic duck? Or maybe a little ceramic planter like for a baby shower? I'm not really worried. She said, "I think you better come up to the front." All right, I said. I got myself out of the chair. I went around the corner, and there Mari is at the counter. She's clearly very excited, but I don't see a duck. She said, "They're putting a purple bow on him." I said, "Are you taking him home to Japan?" Now keep in mind, I don't yet know what he looks like. She said, "Oh no, I'm not taking him home to Japan. He's going to the funeral home." At that very moment, the clerk comes from the back room with the duck. Now just take a moment and look at the duck. This duck, and his bow was a little brighter and bigger at that point in time, he was about to appear in his full purple bow glory at the wake. I didn't have the energy or the will to say no, and I certainly couldn't hurt Mari's feelings. So off he went in the delivery van with the other flowers. Now, this goofy-looking guy had a place of honor next to the casket. If ever a wake had a conversation piece, it was this one. My husband's brother Randy took on the role of explaining how the duck came to be there, and by the end, everyone, and I mean everyone, knew the story. From that moment on, this duck has been a member of the extended family, and we have named him Ed. He's often referred to as Special Ed. So now think back to my original question. How does something become an heirloom? Well, before passing down to generations, Ed was passed around. He spent his first period of time with my daughter, and of course her pets. And here he is with her cat Chuck, enjoying the scenery out her window. And of course there are holidays. She dressed him up for the holidays one year. You have to be ready for Christmas. Now, most heirlooms collect dust, sit on a wall, sit in a box. They're in the attic, in the basement. Not this heirloom. He travels. Special Ed has been busy. He spent a fair amount of time with my brother Randy, who told his story. And Randy took him, of course, where else would he go first? But the duck boats. Enjoying a ride. Hop on, then there you go, away you go. And of course, when he's with Randy, where would he also go? But to play golf. Now, in addition to all of this traveling, the duck boats, the golf, he's been to the beach. In 2012, he went to Japan. My son, my daughter, and myself went to Mari's wedding. Now imagine, look at Ed and think about it. We're the only 3 Americans at a very traditional Japanese wedding, and those Americans came with a duck. With the language barrier, we couldn't even explain why he was there. Look at Ed and Mari. Look at how adoringly he is looking at her. I tell you, he has certainly reached that sentimental standard of heirloom. Now, remember the rest of the definition? Being passed down from generation? Ed not only has my son and daughter, but since 2016, there are now 3 little ones who will know his story and love him. And as a matter of fact, last week, when they were here for dinner, and Ed is sitting on the mantle of my fireplace, little Nora on the left looks over and goes, "Ed, Ed!" He's our family heirloom, and we were there for his birth. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Looks like Ed has cast a special magic on your family.
He
Thanks,
has,
Lorna.
Tom. Thanks.
Wonderful story. Miska Muska. On with our next magician of self-awareness. Here's Troy with markers.
Thanks, Tom. For nearly half a century, generations of Falmouthites have enjoyed the Shining Sea Bikeway. It started as a 3.5-mile trek from Locust Street down to Woods Hole, and most of us know it today as the 10-mile bike path that has the entirety of the town. But I'll give you a little history on the Shining Sea Bikeway. It was so named because back in 1976, for the town's bicentennial, the nation's bicentennial actually, there was a contest here in Falmouth to name the bike path, and a then elementary schooler named Charlotte Hampton came up with the Shining Sea Bikeway name, of course, an homage to Catherine Lee Bates. the author of America the Beautiful and a Falmouth native. I was actually a runner-up for that. My idea was Paul Revere's Ride, but Shining Sea seems like a much more fitting and appropriate name. But related to the Shining Sea Bikeway, I have a great story about one of our stalwart and most treasured town employees, our former engineer, George Calise. My favorite George Calise story is a great example both of his dedication to getting the job done right and his unmatched work ethic. Many, many years ago, early in my tenure as a selectman, I called George up in response to a constituent concern. A constituent had called me up and said, we need mile markers on the bike path. They didn't have the beautiful granite mile markers that we have today. There were no markers denoting the mile spaces on the bike path. So it was still just the original portion from Woods Hole to Locust Street back then. So thinking when I called George up to ask about placing mile markers that I'd hear a simple, I'll take care of it on the other end of the phone, I was a little surprised when George suggested that I meet him at the entrance to the bike path that Saturday, and then the new markers would be installed. So I obliged, figuring I'd have an opportunity to supervise some DPW crews and to demonstrate my management skills in my newfound job as a selectman. And of course, I also thought I'd accept a heaping amount of praise from the adoring public. George, though, in his instructive humility, had other plans. So I showed up that Saturday morning with my daughter, and there was George, with no work crews, alone, with a couple of hammers, some reflective tape, and a walking wheel, a couple of blocks of wood, and he was ready to do the job. There was to be no supervision of workers that day. We, including my young daughter, were the workers. We walked and we measured. We knelt and we hammered and we measured again. And in a few hours, George, my daughter Sydney, and I had alone installed all the markers along all of the 3-mile stretch of the bike path. She still talks about that day and what we were able to accomplish. But the lesson, the example for all of us, was what will be George Calise's lasting legacy. This man, who at times was responsible for hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in public funds, and had been an officer in the United States Navy and led hundreds more people in that job, he needed to show on that day, this new, overly self-assured elected official, that it wasn't enough. It was not enough to simply make a call to get the people's business done. He showed me, and us really, that a good job, a truly good job, consists of caring enough to see the details through and caring enough to do the work yourself if that's what it takes. Many times over the years, that's exactly what it took for George. It was not a rare sight at all to see him around town with a paint can in hand, marking bridges that needed repair, or spraying a pothole that needed filling, or climbing down an embankment that needed reinforcing. And that was all because he cared. See, every village in our community has a project that bears the caring handprint of George Calise. Think of the Church Street Bridge in Woods Hole and the magnificent wooden supports that you see when you ride through on your bike. Supports that otherwise, by the way, would just be one more piece of overgrowth in the concrete jungle, if not for a public official who listened and cared about the public he so richly served. The direct result of the tireless lobbying of George Calise is why that bridge looks like that it does today. You know, he really more could have aptly been named the people's engineer and not the town engineer. The list is nearly endless and stretches from the Chappaquoit Bridge in West Falmouth to the Meadow Neck Bridge in Waquoit, from the repavement of nearly all of Route 28 to the rebirth of that same bike path and its extension all the way to North Falmouth. Few of us in Falmouth, really, have not been touched by the career and the loving hand of George Calise. So George retired in 2009, and he had hired an engineer to take his place named Peter McConerty. And over the years, Peter has risen up through the ranks and recently was promoted to be our Director of Public Works. So I wrote a column about Peter, and I sat down with him because he too was mentored and loved by George. And I wrote a column about Peter and his reflections on his job and his love of the community. And in that column, I told the story of those mile markers and George that day. I sent the column along to George's wife, Crystal, who's still with us. And she called me to talk about the column that I had written and was grateful for the remembrance of George. George died in 2017, and I had the honor to be one of the speakers at his memorial service. And I hadn't spoken to Crystal a lot since then, but when we were having this conversation, she told me she finally had summed up the courage to clean off his desk. He had a drafting desk at home. And she sent me a picture. On that drafting desk, in an envelope that was labeled for Bikeway, but might just as well have been labeled for Falmouth or for Troy, from 25 years ago, were the mile markers and the stickers and those very items that we had placed on the bike path all those years ago. It was not only a remembrance of that wonderful day and that lesson that I was taught by George, but the fact that he had kept it all those years and kept it close to his heart really showed what that kind of work meant and what Falmouth meant to him. And it was just a reminder that even when our loved ones leave us, they're always close by. Thank you for letting me tell the story.
I knew George as well, and he was a wonderful man, a dedicated engineer, and a good friend. And Peter follows well in his footsteps. He's a wonderful guy. Thank you for the story.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for allowing me to tell it.
Seam, salabim. Our next magic quest we take with David and the mystery of 98.6.
Thanks, Tom. All right, 98.6. That's the most important number for your life when you're hiking around in the woods. You get too cold, body shuts down, maybe you die. Get too hot, body breaks down, maybe you die. Either way, it's not going to be good. So you need to stay hydrated. That's one of the keys. So while you're out in the woods, you don't get to have a nice glass of water. You got to bring a water filtration system or a purifier. The next thing you need to think about is your food. You got to have enough food, but you never want to have your food in your tent at the end of the night. Because animals can smell food from miles around, and they will come and get it. Mostly mice, chipmunks, squirrels, things like that will gnaw through your tent into your backpack, and they'll get your food. You don't want that. Now, when the bears show up, they just tear everything apart, including you. So that's not good either. So you want to hang your food in the tree someplace away from you so that doesn't happen. I know all this because I've been hiking and backpacking for a long time. Mostly I do sections of the Appalachian Trail. That's a trail that goes from Georgia to Maine. It takes a good through hiker about 5 or 6 months to do the whole thing. So a couple summers ago, I decided I was going to do a section about 70 miles in Vermont. So one hot, steamy afternoon, I set out from Hanover, New Hampshire, heading south, trying to get my miles in. For 3 days, I struggled through the hot, steamy, mosquito-infested woods, looking for water, not finding it much. And it was getting tough, and I felt old and slow. By the 4th day, at the end, I knew I was in trouble. I had a half a mile to go to the shelter site that I was heading for. My heart was pounding. I couldn't breathe. I felt nauseous. I was getting dizzy. And I stopped by a little brook to get a drink. And as I'm drinking the water, I realized I needed to come up with some kind of plan. I needed to cool down. So I stripped off most of my clothes and I lay down in the stream. And while I was lying there, I started thinking, all right, it's 8 miles to the nearest road on the trail. And I can't walk a half a mile. So that's not going to work. So I thought, the Appalachian Trail is really long, but it's not very wide. I'll set up camp here. And if I wake up in the morning, I'll follow the stream downstream. Hopefully something good will happen. So I get up, set my stuff up, and I figured I needed to eat a little bit of something. So I tried to mix up some food, and I couldn't eat a bite of it because I was so nauseous. So now I'm sitting here. All I want to do is go to bed, and I have a bowl of hot food in front of me. attracting animals from all over. So I made sure I hung up my bear bag a little ways behind me, crawled into my tent, and I fell asleep at some point. Around dawn, I woke up with warm breath on my face. And I opened my eyes, and there was a bear breathing on me through my mosquito netting. And at first I thought, oh, bear. And I thought, what did I do with my food? I couldn't even remember in that split second. And then I started staring at the bear, and the bear's staring at me, and he's breathing on me. And I started looking deep into his eyes, and he was looking deep into my eyes. And then I don't know if it was the heat, but at some point we had like a mind meld thing, and we started to talk. And I said, hey, bear, you look pretty chill, man. And the bear said, yeah, I'm good. You got any food? And I said, no, I got nothing in there. I hung it all on the tree right over there. Yep, already ate all that. You sure you got nothing in there? Maybe I should come in and look. Nope. I think we're good. In fact, I think it's time for you to go. And then I flicked the mosquito netting at him, and the bear jerked back, and he goes, did you just flick me? And I was like, yes, I did. Yes, and I'm sorry, my friend, but it is time for you to go. And then I flicked the tent again, and he jerked his head, and he kind of stood up, and he looked at me, and for a split second, I wasn't sure what was going to happen. And we both paused, and we both looked at each other, and then he started to relax, and he started to slowly back away, and then he ambled off into the woods. Well, I sat in the tent for a little while just to make sure. And then I crawled out, and I looked around, and sure enough, he'd gotten my food. 10 feet in a tree was clearly not enough. My bag was hanging there in shreds, and there was nothing but like little bits of paper with bear saliva all over them, all over the floor of the woods. So I packed up my tent, I stuffed it into my backpack, and I started shuffling down through the water, making my way south. Eventually I got to a town, and eventually I got home. Now my son Sam, a couple years earlier, had been a thru hiker on the AT and done the whole thing, and his only regret was that he never saw a bear. So when I got home, I said, Sam, come here. Have I got a story for you?
Somehow I want to sing The Bare Necessities. Never mind. Okay, thank you, David.
You're welcome.
And poof, just like that, we conclude our show. From the little theater company that could, but we can't without you. If you've enjoyed our magical mystery tour and you are in a position to do so, please donate to the Woods Hole Theater Company at woodsholetheater.org. Please stay tuned for more tales and anecdotes, and we hope to see you real soon. Good night.